Fate was supposed to be untouchable, but the first time Lena Vasquez threaded a needle through the wrong stitch, the world around her trembled. Welcome to our YouTube channel. Before diving into this extraordinary tale, take a moment to hit the like button and subscribe. Your support helps us bring you more intriguing stories like this. Ivory City was a place of winding streets, flickering neon signs, and an undercurrent of desperation that stitched its people together like frayed fabric. In the heart of its underground markets, tucked between stalls of black market tech and dubious alchemical remedies, sat Lena Vasquez's humble tailoring shop, if it could even be called that. The space was little more than a cramped corner behind an old bookstore, where she took in jobs no one else would, patching up stolen designer coats, reinforcing the pockets of pickpockets, and on occasion, outfitting gangsters with bulletproof threaded suits. She was good at what she did, better than she should have been. But she never questioned why, not until the day Jace Marrow stumbled into her shop, bleeding from a fresh wound and clutching a jacket that looked more like a relic than an article of clothing. Jace was a street rat, a runner for one of the city's minor syndicates, someone Lena had patched up more than once when he'd crossed paths with the wrong people. But today, he looked worse than usual. His face was pale, his dark hair matted to his forehead with sweat. He practically collapsed onto her work table, shoving the old jacket toward her. "Lena, I need this fixed."
"Now."
She took the jacket hesitantly, turning it over in her hands. The fabric was unlike anything she'd ever worked with before. It was heavy, interwoven with shimmering, almost metallic strands that seemed to shift beneath her fingertips. It was old, older than Jace, maybe even older than Ivory City itself. "What the hell is this?" she murmured. "Just fix it," Jace pleaded. "Please." Lena sighed and grabbed her sewing kit, but as soon as she threaded her needle and touched the fabric, something shifted. A strange sensation rippled up her arms, like an invisible thread winding itself through her fingers, whispering across her skin. For a moment, she felt something else, a deeper layer beneath the fabric, almost like...
No.
It wasn't just fabric. It was woven fate. She gasped as her vision blurred, colors bleeding into each other. Images flickered through her mind. Jace sprinting through an alley, a shadow lunging at him, a knife slashing through his chest. She saw him hit the pavement, motionless, a pool of blood spreading beneath him. Then, just as suddenly, the vision snapped away. Her hands trembled, the needle still between her fingers. She had never seen anything like that before. "Lena?" Jace's voice sounded distant, like an echo. She swallowed hard and, on instinct, moved the needle through the fabric, not just sewing, but unraveling and restitching something deeper. She didn't know how she knew what to do, but she followed an instinct she couldn't explain. The metallic thread shifted under her touch, realigning, rewriting. When she finished, the jacket looked unchanged. But Lena knew something was different. Jace snatched it back, pulling it on without another word. He barely made it to the door before a gunshot rang out outside. Lena flinched, her heart hammering. She darted to the shop's window just in time to see Jace stumble into the street, right into the path of a speeding truck. She opened her mouth to scream, but before the truck could hit him, Jace tripped over nothing, an invisible force jerking him just out of harm's way. The truck roared past, missing him by inches. Jace, wide-eyed and breathless, turned toward her shop. Their eyes met through the glass, and Lena knew.
She had changed something.
And someone had to have noticed. Lena didn't sleep that night. She sat at her work table, staring at her hands, flexing her fingers, trying to understand what had happened. The vision, the feeling of threads shifting beneath her skin, had been too vivid, too real to be dismissed as imagination. And Jace, he should have died.
She had seen it.
But he hadn't. Because of her. Because of what she had done. The next day, the shop felt different. The usual hum of the underground market was still there, but a new tension ran beneath it, subtle but undeniable. Whispers followed her as she moved through the narrow alleys, the usual vendors watching her for just a little too long, their gazes sharp with curiosity and something else. Suspicion. Word had spread. And then the first stranger came. He was tall, draped in an expensive, well-cut coat that didn't belong in the slums. His face was mostly obscured by a hood, but the way he carried himself, controlled, deliberate, sent a shiver down Lena's spine. He entered the shop without hesitation, gliding between fabric rolls and half-finished garments before stopping in front of her work table. "Lena Vasquez?" His voice was smooth, but there was something weighty behind it, something that told her he wasn't just here for a simple tailoring job. She forced herself to meet his gaze. "Depends on who's asking." The man reached into his coat and withdrew something small. When he set it on the table, Lena felt her stomach drop. A spool of golden thread. Not ordinary thread. Fate thread. The same kind she had seen in Jace's jacket. Her hands curled into fists. "I don't know what you think I am, but I don't deal in that." "You did yesterday." The man tilted his head slightly. "And the fate keepers don't take kindly to interference." Lena's blood turned to ice. The fate keepers. They were a myth. A whispered rumor among those who trafficked in illicit magic, a secretive order that ensured the grand design of fate remained untouched. It was said they could rewrite destinies at will, that they controlled everything from the rise and fall of city leaders to the quiet deaths of those who stepped out of line. And they were real. Lena's pulse pounded in her ears. "I don't know what you're talking about." The man sighed, almost regretful. "We both know that's a lie. You altered a thread. You saw it happen. That kind of power, it doesn't go unnoticed." She swallowed hard. "What do you want?" "For you to stop." She let out a bitter laugh. "I don't even know how I did it." The man studied her for a long moment. Then, as if making a decision, he slid a small, folded piece of parchment across the table. "The name's Dorian Vale. If you don't stop, we will stop you. Read that, and you'll understand why." Then he turned and left, the faint sound of his boots echoing against the stone streets outside. Lena hesitated, then slowly unfolded the parchment. The paper was old, the ink dark and precise. But what made her breath catch in her throat was the list of names scrawled inside. Names of people who had, like her, discovered the ability to alter fate. And beside each name was a single word: erased. Lena didn't stop. She couldn't. After Dorian Vale's visit, she really did. She told herself to ignore the desperate faces that now lingered outside her shop, to turn away the ones who whispered about second chances and changing their fates. She buried her head in mundane work, patching up torn leather jackets and restitching old gloves. But then the girl came. She couldn't have been more than 16, rail-thin and shaking, with a bruise blooming along her jawline. Her name was Alara, and she was running from something. "I need you to fix this." The girl pulled out a coat. Old, tattered, far too large for her frame. But as soon as Lena touched it, the threads whispered. Fragments of the girl's life surged through her mind. A faceless man with iron rings on his fingers, a locked door, a flight of stairs that led only to darkness. A single overwhelming certainty crashed over Lena like a wave. If Alara left now, she would die before sunrise. Lena's hands clenched around the fabric. The warning Dorian had given her echoed in her head. The names on the parchment. Erased. But she couldn't turn Alara away. And so she stitched. This time, she did it with purpose. With understanding. The metallic fate threads shimmered beneath her touch, shifting as she willed them. A new pattern emerged, one that wove Alara out of danger's path. When she handed the coat back, the girl looked the same, but something had changed. The air around her felt different, as if the world itself had adjusted.
And it had.
Hours later, news spread through the underground. A man had been found in an alley, murdered, his body twisted unnaturally, as if fate had snapped back against him. The same man Alara had been running from. Lena had rewritten more than one thread this time. What started as one quiet change soon became a cascading flood. The more Lena altered, the more Ivory City shifted around her. Street gangs that had ruled for decades suddenly found themselves falling apart overnight. Leaders making reckless choices, alliances breaking, betrayals unfolding in places where loyalty had been absolute. A low-level politician, long seen as a joke, rose to prominence, seemingly propelled by a sudden stroke of good fortune. Wealthy families lost their grip on power while nameless faces climbed to heights they had never imagined. And through it all, the fake keepers watched. She could feel their presence now, lurking just beyond sight. Shadows moving against the glow of street lamps. Unfamiliar figures lingering in the market, watching her shop from across the narrow alleys. Dorian Vale hadn't come back, but his warning never left her mind. And then one night, she felt it. Not a vision. Not a ripple in the fabric of fate.
A tear.
Something had broken. Lena staggered back from her work table, gasping as the sensation tore through her mind like a knife. She had gone too far. The city wasn't just shifting, it was splintering. Threads tangled where they shouldn't, colliding, twisting into patterns that should never have existed. Reality itself was unraveling. Then came the scream. It echoed through the market, sharp and jagged. Lena bolted to the door, stepping out just in time to see a man, one of her regular clients, standing in the street, shaking violently. His eyes were wrong, like two mismatched pictures overlapping, flickering between versions of himself. Then, before anyone could react, he collapsed. And just like that, he was gone. Not dead. Erased. The fake keepers had warned her. Now they were coming for her. Lena ran. She didn't know where she was going, only that she couldn't stay. The market, her shop, the only home she had ever known, was no longer safe. The fake keepers had been patient until now, watching, waiting, letting her dig her own grave with every stitch she made. But she had pushed too far. And now the city was unraveling beneath her hands. Jace found her first. "Lena, we have to go." He skidded around the corner of an alley, breathless, his shirt stained with blood. Not his own, she realized, but someone else's. The city was turning on itself. She hesitated, her pulse hammering.
Where?
"There's nowhere left." "Yes, there is." He grabbed her wrist, his grip urgent. "Dorian told me about a place. A place where they control all of it. The threads, the shifts, everything. If we can get there, we can fix this." She froze. The loom of destiny. It was a myth, a story whispered among those who dealt in fate, an ancient machine hidden deep beneath the city, woven into its very foundation. The fake keepers were said to guard it, using it to ensure that Ivory City never strayed too far from its destined path. If Lena could reach it, she could undo the chaos she had caused. But it wouldn't be that easy. The city was already reacting to her interference. The alleys shifted unpredictably. Streets that had existed for years suddenly led to nowhere. Entire blocks folded into themselves like pages in a book, rewritten on the spot. People she had known for years flickered, some gone entirely, others replaced by strangers wearing familiar faces. They had to move fast. Jace led the way through the disintegrating city, navigating a path only he seemed to understand. "It's real, Lena," he assured her as they slipped past collapsing buildings and the hollow stares of those caught in fate's unraveling. "Dorian told me about it before he disappeared. The loom is buried under the old district, under the streets that were built first, before the city swallowed itself." Lena's thoughts reeled. The idea that the entire city was stitched together, controlled by an ancient mechanism, made her stomach churn. "And how exactly are we supposed to get past the fake keepers?" Jace gave her a grim smile. "We don't. We go through them." They reached the entrance by nightfall. It wasn't what she expected. No grand temple, no elaborate vault, just a forgotten maintenance tunnel, rusted from time, hidden beneath the ruins of an old church. Jace pried open the iron gate, his hands shaking. "This is it. Once we go down, there's no going back." Lena hesitated for only a second before stepping inside. The tunnels were silent. Not the quiet of emptiness, but of something watching. The deeper they went, the stronger the pull became. Lena could feel the loom, like invisible threads brushing against her skin, whispering. It knew she was coming. And then, at the heart of the underground labyrinth, they found it. A vast chamber, stretching beyond sight, walls lined with countless spools of golden thread. In the center stood an ancient, mechanical loom, massive and intricate, its gears turning slowly. Fate itself was woven here, each movement of the machine dictating the course of lives above. But something was wrong. The loom was breaking. Threads snapped and twisted in the air, rewriting themselves chaotically. The patterns were unreadable, colliding and fracturing, as if the machine itself was trying to keep up with the damage Lena had caused. And standing before it, waiting for them, was Dorian Vale. "You should have stopped," he said softly. Lena met his gaze, her hands curling into fists. "I didn't come here to stop. I came here to fix it." Dorian exhaled slowly, then drew a long, thin knife from his coat, one etched with fate thread. "Then we have a problem," he said. The loom continued to spin behind him, groaning under the weight of the unraveling world. And Lena knew this was the final stitch. The loom thundered, its great gears groaning under the strain of a city teetering on the brink of collapse. Threads snapped and reattached in a violent dance, rewriting destinies with wild abandon. Lena could feel the raw energy in the air, a charge that made her skin prickle, her heartbeat hammering in sync with the machine's desperate whirring. Dorian Vale stood before her, his fate-etched blade gleaming under the dim glow of the chamber. His stance was steady, his expression unreadable. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to stop her. Lena clenched her fists. "I didn't come here to fight." "Then you shouldn't have come at all." Dorian stepped forward, slow and deliberate. "You don't understand what you've done. What you've broken." "I understand better than you think." She swept her gaze over the loom, watching as the golden thread spasmed, erratically shifting patterns before her eyes. This wasn't just a machine, it was alive. And it was dying. Fate isn't holding together anymore. And you know it. Dorian hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Then, his grip on the knife tightened. "That's why we need to contain it. We can still stabilize the loom. But not if you keep interfering." Lena's mind raced. "I'm not here to interfere. I'm here to end this cycle. Fate can't be controlled like this anymore. People deserve to choose." Dorian's eyes darkened. "And what happens when they make the wrong choice? When chaos spreads unchecked?" Ivory City wasn't built on free will, Lena. It was built on order. "No," she shot back. "It was built on fear. Fear that without control, everything would fall apart. But it's already falling apart, Dorian." The loom shuddered as if in agreement. Jace's voice cut through the tension. "We don't have time for this. The machine is failing." Lena could see it now, the core of the loom, its massive central spindle unraveling at the seams. There was no repairing this. No stabilizing it. The system was already collapsing. She turned to Dorian, her voice steady. "We can either let this machine dictate every life in Ivory City, or we can destroy it and finally let people decide their own futures." Dorian exhaled sharply, his eyes flicking between Lena and the loom. She could see the war in his mind, the years of training, of believing in an order that no longer made sense. Then, with a slow, deliberate movement, he lowered the knife. "If we do this," he said quietly, "there's no going back." Lena reached out, placing her hand over the loom's core. "I don't want to go back." She felt it, the threads of fate beneath her fingertips, fraying, ready to break. She called upon the gift she never asked for, the power that had both saved and damned her. With one final stitch, she unmade it all. The loom screamed. The chamber trembled. The golden threads twisted violently, snapping free from their mechanical prison. Fate fractured, not in chaos, but in liberation. Ivory City shifted, not into ruin, but into possibility. The sun rose over a city reborn. The streets had changed. Everything had changed. People who had once been trapped in the rigid weave of destiny now found themselves at a crossroads, uncertain but free. Lena stood at the edge of her shop, rebuilt but different. No longer a place of quiet servitude, but of choice, of new beginnings. Jace leaned beside her, watching the people pass. So, what now? Lena smiled faintly. Now we see what they make of their own lives. Dorian was gone. He had disappeared into the shifting streets, his purpose shattered along with the loom. But Lena had a feeling their paths would cross again. She glanced at her hands, the faint glow of thread work still lingering beneath her skin. The ability to stitch fate was still within her. But now, she would never use it to control, only to mend. And for the first time, her own fate was finally her own. Thank you for diving into Lena's magical threads. What would you do if you could weave the fate of others? If you enjoyed the journey, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more adventures.